Hi. Hello. Hi. Good morning. Apologies, we were rushing from the other session to this session. So my name is Maria Mendiluce. I'm Managing Director at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I will be the moderator of this session. So at COP23, at the Industry Day, we will showcase climate actions across key industry sectors. And by exploring the various and innovative solutions being deployed today, we will show how industry is taking action to create a low-carbon economy. There are three trends and forces shaping industry today that can be harnessed for strengthened climate action. We will show how smart infrastructure, circular economy, and business engagement are key drivers for that transformation. So in this session, we will talk about circular economy and how innovation in materials and design can be a catalyst for the transition to a low-carbon future. Sustainable materials and design reduce the environmental and social impact of material use across industries. As industries shift towards carbon-neutral packaging, buildings and infrastructure, sustainable materials could provide a lasting solution to a low-carbon future. So this session will explore innovative materials and design across different industries, including building materials and industrial equipment. In addition to sharing success stories, the panel will discuss ambition, action, and exciting new opportunities. By designing out waste and innovating in materials and design, companies can significantly reduce their operation costs, improve competitiveness, and strengthen customer relationships. At the same time, by incorporating high energy efficiency and enhancing environmental performance in the product life cycles, companies minimize their GHG emissions and align their sustainability business strategy with the climate action plans from governments, creating a win-win situation. So today, I'm here with 5 speakers with whom we will engage in the next 90 minutes. I would like this session to be somewhat interactive, and given the fact that we're a small group, I think that can be easily be done. But first, I would like to introduce Alexander Meyer-Sumfelde, Principal Sustainability Expert at Boston Consulting Group, who's going to give us a presentation about how companies are using circular economy and try to reduce emissions and meet other sustainability strategies. Afterwards, we will have a distinguished panel with Elizabeth Beardsley, Senior Policy Counsel at the U.S. Green Building Council, Andreas Gillenhammer, Chief Sustainability Officer at Sweco, Manuela Ohan, Public Affairs and Sustainable Construction Manager at Heidelberg Cement, and Mr. Hans Jones Wedgitz, Head of Energy, Environmental and Climate Policies at ThyssenKrupp. I do apologize because I'm sure I didn't pronounce well your name, but myself and my last name often is not very well pronounced, so I think I can understand how you feel. And I'm Maria Mendiluce. So, Alex, can you present the result of your analysis? And then I will ask the panelists to give us some feedback on the presentation and briefly introduce what their companies are doing before they go into presenting, more concrete solutions in the space. And then we will conclude with hopefully 30 minutes of Q&A. Thank you, Alex.
Well, first of all, welcome to the session, and thanks a lot for inviting me to speak here. This is a really exciting opportunity, and as you heard, also a very exciting panel to really showcase how the industry and how some of the large chemical players are really implementing and developing solutions to the targets we really have. So let me briefly introduce to you what the session is about today. So as you've heard, the idea is we have a very, very long way ahead. We really need to create solutions also from the industry side and really need to implement what has been discussed at past COPs. And one of these elements to really implement that is the idea of circular economy, which I'd like to introduce to you a little bit broader. However, having said that, why are we talking? And I guess most of you are, because you're visiting the COP, are familiar with some of the key facts that we're gonna discuss. But the problem we are facing is we're using up resources more than we have, more than the planet Earth can currently renew. And if we look at all these different elements across industry, we're facing significant challenges. This is from plastics making up more volume by 2050 than fish in the ocean, right? We're looking at textiles. Less than 20% of all textiles in the world consumed are recycled, reused. So we're wasting materials. We're producing food for the world. 1/3 of the food production is lost. So basically, we are eroding our lands. We are using up too much water to produce goods and services that currently we either don't need or we can't refurbish. And you're all aware that the world population is growing. So we somehow need to feed and provide services and solutions to these people. We're currently using up about 1.5 times the Earth resources that it renews and replenishes every single year. And we're actually on a strong trajectory going towards using up 2 planets in 15 years from now. So we really need to act, and we really need to change something. We really need to change the way we do business. We produce goods and services that all the consumers, all of you out there, are really requiring and requesting from us as an industry to produce. So the idea, for example, on circular economy is the following. You start producing and designing products that somehow help towards the SDGs. So you're losing less emissions along the way. Optimally, you're completely eliminating emissions. You're designing products that they are refurbishable, reusable, reutilizable along the value chain so that we're not wasting all of the resources we put into the products we're producing. And this is really, it does sound easy, but it's really challenging because it's basically rethinking how we do businesses today as such. It starts with the design of products. It really starts at the very beginning of the value chain, and we need to incorporate all the suppliers, the whole value chain, to really find solutions to produce responsibly and sustainable, but also to provide the collection system, the recycling systems, to reuse materials and products we're using today. And there are 3 elements in the industry world that are considered space for innovation. One is the process part, one is the product innovation, and the last one is really the business model around it as a comprehensive set of companies. And I'll be talking about these 3 in a minute and really showcase on how some of the companies and some of the very advanced companies here in the panel with me are really innovating along these lines to produce not only better products, but really good products as such. And it's important to understand, even if we close the loop as such when we talk about circular economy, if we put poor quality and poor materials and hazardous material into the stream at the beginning, we keep on recycling that, right? So we really need to think of how to conduct business more responsibly from the beginning of the value chain. Having said that, you might be wondering, why is this relevant for the industry? There's the notion out there, companies only care for their profits, and that's all they care about, and the rest basically doesn't matter to them. So the question is, do companies really look at these from a risk prevention side, or is it actually opportunity? Is it an opportunity to grow, to develop new businesses, to really expand the way the businesses operate and to grow? And interestingly enough, and the World Business Council has helped us to do a lot of research on this work, and we've conducted jointly a survey. And interestingly enough, almost 100% of the companies we spoke with and talked to believe that circular economy is a very critical element for future success. It's not only a sustainability strategy anymore, it is critical to succeed in the future and to really think about how responsibly you're producing goods. More interestingly, and that's where really things start kicking off, and this is what the COP here in Bonn is all about, is really the investments. Where does the money come from to implement these changes? And what we see currently in the industry, across industries actually, across sectors, is really that companies are investing more and more into not only sustainability, but really producing core products at the heart of their core business that are more responsible, that are doing much better, that are eliminating any of the emissions, that are reducing water consumption, that are made to be recycled, that are building up new service models. And this is really what is inspiring and what is a positive signal towards achieving and implementing some of the changes we're looking at. So I mentioned earlier there are about 3 stages where you can conduct innovations, and let me start briefly on the left-hand side. the process innovation. This is at the core, at the heart of what businesses have been doing for the last 100, 150 years. It's nothing new, right? To look at your processes, to make them more efficient, energy efficient, water efficient, and so on, because it's basically cost to your baseline. So nonetheless, currently, less than so, just looking at the cost, there's more and more trends towards LCA, life cycle assessment as such, and really understanding how much resources are we consuming, not only on the cost side, but also on the emissions. In some countries, we don't have any carbon trade exchanges yet, or carbon pricing, yet companies are really committing and looking at their value chain. How much are we emitting at these? So there are tons of industries who've really mastered this challenge around the process innovation. For example, if you look at pulp and paper industry, forestry industry, about 30, 40 years ago, even here in Germany, the rivers were completely polluted by producing recycling papers and such. By now, all these companies have cleaned up their mess. They are producing, even in Brazil and Chile, CMPC, there are companies out there who are really responsibly innovating their processes to reduce waste, reduce water consumption, or even fully eliminate this. So on this side, the process innovation, I would say industry across sectors is already fairly much advanced. Where it becomes really interesting, and I think, or I'm convinced you'll hear something from the panel about product innovation. We're now moving into times where companies are really innovating around products, developing new products. So for example, in the chemical sectors, biodegradable materials, right? If you're looking at some of the construction materials, and you'll hear about them, reducing emission or even being climate neutral as such as an ingredient is quite interesting. Those are new products, and they are opening up new markets. So you might be cannibalizing at the short term some of your current business, which obviously is a challenge, but as more and more companies are moving into this direction, it creates a competitive advantage, and in the long run, it's necessary to compete. And this is where it becomes truly interesting once it's about your competitive advantage as a company. Having said that, and we see currently that a lot of companies, and there are some good initiatives out there, are struggling to move towards the business model innovation. So if you look at product innovation, it's only part of your portfolio. It's single products as such that you start innovating around, that you put out there. Portfolios make up 5–10% of your business, right? But really moving the business model innovation means changing how you conduct business. And there are a few really, really good examples out there. For example, if you consider Philips Lighting a few years ago, rather than selling light bulbs, they're moving into selling a light experience, innovating their business model around repairing light bulbs and really ensuring 100% light experience. That forces companies to rethink how to construct their services, how to build up their materials, how to build up the light bulbs, making them easier repairable and such, because it becomes cost to the new business model. However, having said that, and I'm really curious listening at the panel, most of the companies, even the large ones famous in this sector, are struggling to really make the step from products towards fully business model innovation. However, we're very positive to see that in the next 15 to 20 years evolving. Having said that, interestingly enough, and this is really out to the consumers, consumers are not willing to pay a financial premium for those products. So basically, you're putting up pressure on the industry, but basically you're saying you need to innovate, you need to find new business models, you need to conduct business more sustainably, but we're not willing as consumers to pay more for it. As individual consumers, you see it in the fashion retail, food sector is slightly evolving, but still you see it when about the purchasing behavior of mobility, cars, and so on. There's only a very small portion of the global population willing to pay a premium for sustainability, yet forcing companies to innovate around that. Having said that, the interesting element is there is a business case. The business case is not the €1, $1 markup on the product. The business case is really about creating some new products, creating new niche markets that you have a competitive advantage in, creating more long-lasting relationships, actually enabling your value chain to conduct business more responsibly. So if you think about the packaging industry, they need to have biodegradable materials. If you think about the construction industry, if you want to build a LEED certified building, if you want to build and construct roads, but there is no product out there that in the end is reusable or that can be somehow used again in other construction products, there's no way of doing business as such. So this really creates opportunities for businesses to engage in these innovations and really drive the implementation. And honestly, or let's not kid ourselves, the implementation of all these ambitious goals, of all the climate changes, need to come also from the business sector. So I'm very, very positive that we have a few examples here on the panel today of companies really thinking about how to implement SDGs, really how to mitigate climate change as such, and taking on responsibility on conducting business in water scarce areas as such. Having said that, there are more companies now understanding there's value in this, and whenever there's value in doing a certain way in business, companies are moving in this direction. So very positively, most of the companies that we have talked to, that we have featured in this survey, and we're talking about 100 companies globally, do see a very positive business case for circular economy as such. Nonetheless, I want to conclude, and this is a little bit more out to the business audience here. How can you engage on this? How can you really start implementing some strategies and innovating your business around that? And the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is an organization of more than about 200 member companies really trying to do more or better business and really trying to develop solutions, implementable solutions that are expendable and scalable across the globe. And here are some of the recommendations that come from those companies. So first of all, closely engage with your stakeholders. Really think about what is key to your business, what is material to your business, what do your stakeholders want? Stakeholders being obviously your customers, but also NGOs. Are they pressuring you? Are they actually challenging your license to operate? Why are they doing this? Is it for social purposes? Is it for water? Is it for emissions? Really understand what drives your stakeholders, and don't neglect the investors around this. Second, strong top management. What we see currently is really doing sustainability, environmental strategies, circular economy, and so on requires top management attention. If your board is not behind this, it's not going to be successful. So really create the business case, really identify the business value, because this is what top management decisions drive. Let's move to really developing a strategy and defining what it means to your business. It is different for each and every business. Your core business is different. You're operating in different markets. Really, let's go and try to identify what's material to your business. Let's define a strategy and set an ambitious vision. Only if you have an ambitious vision, your organization will move. The fourth one is, don't neglect to take your employees on the journey. This is usually easier on the sustainability part because most people do connect more with their company if they're doing good business. If you have lighthouse projects, employees are happy about this. However, the business units are usually incentivized around performance. So make sure to incorporate the business units and really understand what drives value in these business units. It's not about being environmentally friendly. It's really about combining these elements and driving business value. As I mentioned earlier, start with the processes, develop products, and only then go into business model innovation. We've seen a few examples failing because they jumped directly into the third pillar. Really start the journey with your processes, which every company is already doing. Innovate around products, and then start enhancing your business model around it. Collaborate with your value chain. This is really an exercise that needs to move along the value chain. You can't do it by yourself. You need to be sure that your supplier are really adhering to what you're asking them. You can't produce any biodegradable materials if your suppliers are not delivering the right input. If you are having a great water strategy, but somewhere along your value chain, other suppliers, partners are not going with you, you will not succeed. And public doesn't ask the question, was it in your part of the value chain? It is eventually your product, so just be careful of your value chain here. The seventh one, and this is critical to any type of business you conduct, identify KPIs, identify the key financials. This is not about doing just something nice to the world. This is really creating value as a business. And only if you do sustainable business, you will succeed in the future. So this really is critical to identify what are you measuring against, what are your targets, and make sure to incentivize your organization against those as well. And last but not least, and this is really critical, only if you do so, and only if you've achieved on the other 7, start talking about it. Don't do greenwashing. People will notice that with all the social media coming up, with all the transparency about business conduct and business behavior. Really, really market your successes once you have achieved them or you're on a very positive path. And this includes your investors. Investors value success and a strong vision and ambition, right? Don't just put out an idea and say, we're already there. Be transparent, be honest, but communicate your successes here. Having said that, concluding on the initial question, why are businesses and why is this an exciting time to be in the industry, engaging on this? Is it only risk prevention? Yes, it is, for those that haven't really advanced on these topics, that haven't created competitive advantage. You don't want to lose your license to operate. You need to keep it. You need to adhere to law, no doubt about it. So risk prevention is one of the elements. But for those companies who really start engaging on this exciting journey, who really start to develop new products, it creates a competitive advantage. It creates an area for growth, and there are tons of examples of industries or of companies in different industries that have really mastered to develop 10, 15, 20% of their portfolio on sustainable materials, on new products, service models that actually provide either higher margins or at least higher growth rates. So there is a business case and business value out there on engaging on this journey. Thank you very much for your attention. I really look forward to your comments on this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the panelists to just reply very shortly, would you agree with the results of this analysis? And while they are responding, I would ask the audience if you have any questions for Alex. Now is the time to ask. So first, let's start with Andreas, that can give us his opinion, and then we move in this direction. So Andreas.
Thank you, Maria. So my name is Andreas Gyllenhammar. I work as the Chief Sustainability Officer of Sweco, being the largest consultancy firm in Europe at the moment. We are 15,000 consultants working with every aspect of the built-up environment. So we have competences in infrastructure, energy, urban planning, architecture, environment, structural design, IT. You can keep it going like that, industry. I would say that we are almost completely backing up the view that is presented here. Circular economy, we think, will be a cornerstone of the economic dimension of sustainability in the future. It can actually be very well the answer to how future growth can be possible within planetary boundaries. And I would say the fact that 97% of the companies in this study recognizes this shows that business has understood this now, and we can move to the implementation phase of the circular economy. Also, I would say it's a signal to national authorities and legislation that we need to do some changes, because this will be a profound change. It's a systemic change. The fact that this study shows that this is not regarded as a premium value that you can charge for somewhat questions how you are going to work with the circular economy from a business standpoint. I would say it's rather a change that will make you more successful towards a new normal, and that makes your strategy perhaps a bit different. It will demand product innovation, it will demand new collaborations and new business models, and probably that is where it becomes really, really tricky, because when we talk to scientists in Sweden and on our markets, we see that industrial symbiosis is key, but the companies at the moment, they are not finding each other, they are not really knowing on how to get use of their excess products and turning waste into another company's resource. So I will elaborate on that in my speech. Thank you.
Yes, please don't burn all your points now. And then let's move to Manuela.
Yes, I am Manuela. I'm from Heidelberg Cement. Heidelberg Cement is the second largest producer worldwide of cement, third producer worldwide of concrete. So we belong to the cement industry, and as you know, it's one of the energy-intensive industries, and as well as intensive in terms of consumption of raw materials. Our carbon footprint is around 60 million tons of CO2 per year. So you can understand for us, climate change and circular economy are key topics. We are highly involved in activities of the Cement Sustainability Initiative, and we share with them the agenda for action. In terms of the presentation we heard before, I think it gives a broad view of the issue, and part of it is applicable to the specific issues of the construction material industry. For example, when you commented about why getting engaged in circular economy, for sure we see for us now top of the list risk prevention, because we are highly dependent on fuels and resources, so a shortage of supply and all the environmental related impacts to them are relevant to us. In terms of revenue growth, we hope in the future also to have to leverage on this issue, but it's still not the case now, because the market is not yet uptaking all the innovative solutions that we are trying to provide to the market. Indeed, going further to your points, I see that customer value for us, it's a really relevant topic, and we need to educate our customers. That's why, for example, companies like mine, we are parts of the Green Building Councils in many countries worldwide, because we want to promote the engagement of our customers, that in our case are more architects, designers, builders, for example, main contractors, as well as the public authorities and governance, that they should accept new codes and construction standards to allow for the use of new products. Also, for us, the value chain is relevant, because for us, what we call kind of industrial symbiosis allows us to get the materials we need. And many of the recycled materials are byproducts of other industry. So we need to work in a collaborative approach also with other industrial sectors.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuela. I'm taking note. I'll recap at the end, but let's move to Hans. So what do you think, Hans?
Good morning. I'm Hans-Jörn Weddiger. I'm not the head of, I'm the group coordinator, Energy, Environmental and Climate Policies. And that's very important, because that's not something you can direct from the top. And it's about policies I'm doing, it's not about politics. So it's really about what's the mindset we have in that group. The second reason why I'm coordinating things is ThyssenKrupp is a very diversified industrial globally. I think we are one of the very few companies that, at least in the area of materials, are active nearly everywhere. We are known in certain parts of the world as one of the major steel makers. We certainly have one of the largest materials trading business, definitely not just for steel, but all materials across the board. And certainly with our components and other businesses, we are a significant user of materials. But on top of that, we are actually one of the largest manufacturers of material making plants, if you would like to call that. So for example, cement plants, plants for chemical products, even things like assembly lines for batteries for cars. So therefore, certainly, this is very much at the heart of it, and you already see this idea of the value chain coming up. But I would actually say this is not enough. It's not just, and that was something I would actually add to the presentation, it's not just about us working within our supply chain, or supply network actually more than a chain, up and down. It's also very much about things like transparency, things like regulatory frameworks and other things, including the feeling of society. I mean, one of the reasons, for example, why we are not selling at the moment in India cement plants that use municipal waste is the very fact that municipal waste depositing doesn't cost anything. So coal is cheaper. You just throw it away. It turns into methane, 25 times as CO2 intensive as CO2, and that's it. So that's nothing you can do without the appropriate regulatory framework. The other thing, however, is that this actually leads to something which we believe is very important. It is really about true costs and looking at what costs things. If I look at another part of our business, steel, you do a circular economy for about 4,000 years. Why? Because there's a value attached to it. You wouldn't throw away gold, you just reuse it. Reason being, it costs money. You might think about paper, okay, here actually it's not so much about the value of paper, it's about, yes, it's embedded in our tradition, paper needs to be recycled. So that's very important that we go beyond that linear thing and look into the framework conditions that do actually define everything we are doing, but also are not shying away, because I believe we as industry have already to show quite a lot, particularly in circular economy. But the only problem is we're not talking about that in these terms. And let me just very quickly finish with sustainability, which you mentioned. The first notion of sustainability, at least known to me, is one from a mining captain of a mining area in Germany, and that was all about forestry and the issue, how do I get enough trees in future for both into the mines, make sure the tunnels don't fall in, and secondly for actually smelting enough of my ores. And that's the first attempt of sustainability, make sure your forests are actually going at the same speed as you take things out of them. They even called it sustainability, but they didn't think about it in the sense we think about it today. But sometimes very interesting to look back. This would be a management manual for sustainability for the year 2017, as well as it was in the 1700s.
Thank you. Well, very inspiring comments. Now let's move to Elizabeth. So any comments?
Thank you. I'll be very quick. Liz Beardsley, Senior Policy Counsel at the U.S. Green Building Council. I think this is a great report. The circular economy model really has the potential to disrupt this disturbing pattern of overconsumption and waste that we continue to see. You've provided a great framework here with the key points, and I want to especially emphasize collaboration as key. And I think we would add, from what we've seen from our business members in the US and elsewhere, who are creating great innovations for sustainable building, is to look to break down the barriers, so not just vertically and horizontally, and even really thinking outside the box. Borrowing from another industry, there's a kind of a neat example of how to save on life cycle carbon and transportation of products. In the eastern United States, we have a very big cranberry industry that's headquartered in New England, and we have a big orange industry in Florida. Well, it turns out trucks were going back and forth, bringing the oranges to New England and going back empty, bringing the cranberries to Florida and coming back empty. Somehow they got together, and now they're keep making sure that trucking is more efficient in the shipping. So that's probably even an antiquated example, but still just kind of that there might be things that aren't really being considered. If you sort of open your mind and start pursuing some innovation, new things will come up that you hadn't even considered.
Thank you. Okay, now let's turn to the audience. I mean, anyone has any comments to reflect or questions to Alex? There are some mics somewhere. I think Philippe? Yes. Could someone bring a mic to Philippe Fonta, who we know very well? He's heading the Cement Sustainability Initiative at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Philippe? Keep talking.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a question to you, Alex. I started working in the subject of environment and sustainable development well before I was in the WBCSD, and it was in the early 90s, actually. And at that time, some companies were starting their environmental process or putting in place their environmental strategy. And the elements they identified is talk to your stakeholders, have the involvement of the top management, involve your business units, etc. So all the elements you have identified in your circular economy were there for the environmental approach. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I fully support that. But the question I would have, because I strongly believe in the circular economy, how can we make sure that we will not wait 20 years for getting to the point we are today in climate change with companies doing something on circular economy, and how can we scale up this process faster than what was the case for climate change and other environmental issues more than 20 years ago?
Thanks, that's a great question. First of all, good to see you here as well. I would say the following. So indeed, these recommendations are not new and they are not completely groundbreaking. I agree with that. What's new in this report is really showcasing the implementation of this. And obviously we don't have enough time to expand really around this, but the World Business Council and BCG joined forces to really understand how is this implementable and what are the key success factors to implement these strategies. So once the report comes out and will be launched in Davos beginning of next year, we really showcase 15 company examples across different industries. What were the drivers? So which stakeholders started to engage with the companies? Where did the ideas come from and how did they implement it? How does it move in the decision line in companies? Where comes the initial idea? Who approves it? When is it implemented? What drives business units to really convince the business units, and usually those are the ones who need to implement it, to start changing some or start implementing some of these changes, right? So I think that's the first step, really showcasing in which kind of industries and leader companies this already creates value and a competitive edge, which makes then business move along. And I think that's one of the main differences to 20, 30 years ago, that now times is changing more quickly. There's more transparency along the value chain, and the competitive edge, if you don't create it at the beginning and you're not the first mover, you're losing out on some of the value. So I think that's the first idea. The second one is obviously, and I think that's where we need to expand, and that's why we already also discussed this at the COP, the regulators are moving incredibly slowly around these topics. I mean, if you look at recycling rates, if you look at waste collection systems across the globe, there's no collection system for consumer textiles yet. There's no real collection system or refurbishable of construction materials, and I might get some disagreement along the table, but I don't see any countries really have strong regulation around reusability of materials as such. So I think that's the second issue, or second key, and the third one is the consumer. And I think that's where companies start doing a little bit. Governments are certainly not doing enough, but we really need to educate consumers. Because if there's a demand, not only in the direct space, but if you're constructing your buildings, your housing, if your policymakers are asked to really construct buildings sustainably that can be torn apart, can be reused, right? And those materials are not lost. We will see a business case, and I think that's where you're moving. As long as there are no business cases, companies will move fairly slowly. But having these three pillars, businesses really showcasing where it creates value and creates revenue growth or new market segments, pushing the regulators to think more about these topics, and these costs are prevalent and are occurring more and more and more regularly now. And then lastly, really creating consumer awareness to change the demand and increase transparency along the value chain. So I'm fairly positive that we're not waiting another 20 years to see no changes. However, it's moving too slowly. Let's be honest, we all know that, we're all convinced of this. So we really need to work together, not only as World Business Council, but as businesses, as industries, to really also provide these solutions and to try to sell them.
Thank you. So now we're going to move and to hear from the panelists about much more specific examples on how they are designing the materials plants across different industries to reduce and doing that in a way that reduces emissions. But before doing that, let me convey, the points that I took note. So I think companies are moving to circular economy first and most to reduce risks, because let's face it, some of the resources that they use are finite, and they need to manage those risks. We didn't hear a lot that companies are using it to showcase leadership, because really companies, what they want to see is the value. And when there is a value about recycling materials, then circular economy is working very well. And by the way, circular economy is nothing new. It's been going on for many, many years, but now we call it circular economy. No? I think what has changed is that before we used to look first at the processes. Let's see, energy efficiency is circular economy. And or product, let's make it more efficient, fine. And we see in the stats. I think what is really new is this business model. And let's looking at how to introduce circular economy across the full circle. And that's what is new. And because it's new, that's why less companies are engaged. I think it's 20% on your statistics, no? But that's what is relevant today. And that's when you look at the full circle, then that's when you need to collaborate. But the last point, which for me is fundamental, is how do you drive the demand for circular economy products because consumers are not going to pay. So you do it through two ways, through regulation. It could be through pricing or through mandates. So it's just exactly like in any other sector. No? If we want to push the circular economy, we can do that. But we're also seeing that some industries are starting also to be proud of selling recycled plastics, shampoo bottles, for example. And that's quite interesting. That's an area where the World Business Council is very keen in pushing forward. But let's stop hearing me. Let's hear about what the panelists have to say. And we will start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, would you want to come here or do you want to do it from there? Okay, you're welcome, please, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thanks again, all of you, for being here. And slides. We'll go right to the next one. Am I going the wrong way? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So the U.S. Green Building Council is a mission-based nonprofit organization, and our mission is to transform the built environment to one that is sustainable, resilient, and equitable. And we've long advocated for intent in building materials and have had many members involved in innovation in building products and services as well. So we're really excited to be on this panel in particular here at the COP. So when we look at buildings, we hear a lot about how much energy is being used by buildings, about 40% of total energy globally. But if you factor in the embodied carbon, that number is much more, or the life cycle of the building. So we know that to make the progress we need to keep below 2 degrees, we really need to improve on materials, to innovate and select materials so that they are lowering their carbon impact and potentially could serve to bind carbon and become a carbon sink. And because the building mass is so great, there really is potential to make a dent there. Oops, I'm sorry. How do I go back? So I want to talk briefly about some of the factors that are driving consideration of materials in the United States. And it's really under an evolution in the last decade. So in the past, we've seen increasing interest in product innovation, looking at how to support sustainable building, highly efficient buildings, and net zero buildings. So it's been mostly on developing products to suit that purpose. And then at the same time, we've seen some initial interest in trying to reduce impacts, particularly initially focused on overall environmental footprint of products through the life cycle, and also some coming at it from specifically a health perspective. And that's been fairly active as well. We've also seen the green building systems provide some incentives and rewards and sort of elevate the issue. I think that's been a helpful driver. And then more recently, the state climate commitments and some specific regulations that address embodied carbon in building products has come to fruit. So we're going to see how that plays out. And so I think also the corporate interest is coming from seeing that market opportunity and wanting to be involved in that growth. So with LEED, what we have that's particularly relevant to product innovation are a couple of our credits in the materials and resource category. As you may know or may not know, fully about a third of our points in the LEED system in our latest version are oriented to reduce building impact on the climate. So it's been a core piece of our program for many years. And in particularly looking at the suite of material and resource credits, a couple are most relevant. First, the building life cycle impact reduction is a credit that encourages building teams to look at the life cycle impact of the building from cradle to grave and to take that into account. And then, and that's one way that we can both encourage use of existing building, but also to look at, on a product basis, the total impact on carbon. And then secondly, to optimize materials using environmental product declarations has been another driver, and there's been a lot of activity on EPDs in the US. The federal government's actually been involved in materials as innovation as a driver as well, and you can see, maybe you can't see, sorry about that, on this list, but and this is in 2017, there are specifications for federal projects under the major landlord agency, the General Services Administration, and new projects must use these specifications for these material types. And that includes some that are more from a health focus and others that are looking more to the future to reducing carbon impact. So I think that's pretty interesting. And that still remains in place. So that's been another driver. Signaling interest and also providing like a base market. Most recently, just last month, California enacted the Buy Clean California Act. And so this law will have the state, basically the General Services Office in California, DGS, will develop maximum greenhouse gas potential numbers for specific products. There's 4 product categories identified so far. That's carbon steel rebar, flat glass, mineral wool board insulation, and structural steel. And so all new state of California building project specifications will have to meet those specific requirements. So I think we're going to see that become a driver, and that will be implemented in part through EPDs. So we're going to be involved, our community in California will be involved in that and engaging the private sector. And then just lastly, I wanted to highlight there has been also some collaboration, public-private research, academics, and then the newest thing is the Embodied Carbon Network, and you can find it at embodiedcarbonnetwork.org. This is a project of the Carbon Leadership Forum, and we've joined with them and some other organizations as a founding organization in a new initiative, building to cool the climate. And this is really a collective action impact initiative, which will be looking to help support collaboration to bring more products through development and provide that setting for more research as well to support those efforts. And some of the types of products we're talking about are low carbon cement products, concrete that captures CO2, plastic that's made out of methane, and insulation from recycled cardboard. So there's lots of potential here, and we're excited to see where it goes. So I think that's where I am. Right, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go, I wanted to ask you a question.
Yes.
I mean, it's encouraging to see all this legislation in California.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know whether there are other states as well that are pushing for more strengthened legislation,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the relative size of the green building segment in the U.S. For me, it's difficult to understand whether it's small, it's medium, it's average. I don't know how you
Okay.
compare it with, and
Yeah.
if you could give us some flavor of that.
Thank you. So on the first point, Minnesota and Oregon also have policies, but we know from other sectors that often what California does, that sort of sets the tone for the country. It sort of depends on the product. So for products that have like a single or a smaller set of manufacturing locations, then they'll just meet the California standard and sell that across the country. In other things, if it's more of a local product, perhaps the concrete, then that may not have that same spillover effect throughout the country. In terms of green building in the US, I do have some data that I'm trying to recall, but I can tell you that for the LEED system, we're now certifying over 2 billion square feet per day on average, and about half of that is in the US and about half outside the US. So, we're now seeing LEED in over 160 countries, but there's still strong demand in the United States.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move to the next speaker. Andreas, maybe you can talk to us about the reality in Scandinavia, which is probably different.
I'd be happy to do that,
Hopefully.
yes. And also what we have learned from designing sustainable cities in the rest of the world. To start, I would shift the focus to the design phase here, because we think that is where things are going to happen. We have, as Sweco, we have been urban planners for a long time, and I will show you this picture that shows that Sustainable Cities was a project that we made for the UN summit in Johannesburg 2002. And we realized back then that it's actually possible to make a sustainable city if you can start from scratch. And what we do in Sweden and in Nordic countries, we are very good at cooperation. That is a cultural thing, it's a trademark, and we use that when we do construct our cities. Unfortunately, as in many parts of the world, our cities are already built, as you know. So the trick is, how do we do this and apply this learning from the eco-cycle models that we used in Stockholm, where you move from linear city systems to circular systems in waste, energy and water. How do you apply that to our existing systems? We simply do not have time to rebuild, and we have infrastructure lock-in effects. So that design question has been burning for us the last years. We do those things in China, as I said. They still call us to do city planning for new cities, but otherwise it's taking parts of cities and connect that. And what we learned, if I bring this discussion over to industry, is that industrial symbiosis is key. That is a quick change. And so what we see in Sweden now is the emergence of a lot of industry parks, where industries, they get up together and they co-locate. Co-location is very important when we talk about.
Could you give a definition of what is industrial symbiosis for the
Sure.
audience?
Industrial symbiosis is about cooperation in industry. It's about using your processes in relation to other industries' processes. So if you have something that you used to regard as waste, it can be the input, for example, carbon dioxide, it can be waste energy that can be used in another industrial process. In that case, you usually have something that costs you money that you can sell, and then it's a win-win for everyone. Sure. This is one example from the energy side. We see that there's a lot of action on the energy side in Sweden. This is an industrial park, and it's a European spallation source, you know, the particle accelerator that uses a lot of energy, and we feed that into the district heating system of the nearby city. We also see a lot of data centers coming up in the Nordic region. We have a cold climate and cheap electricity. We are now starting to use those data centers in the middle of the cities instead of locating them outside. In that sense, we can also use that energy to heat up the city in itself. So we are moving from having a country where we have a lot of good waste to energy systems, and now we're working our way up the value cycle. I think we talk here about value chain still. In 5 years, we will only talk about value cycles and value networks, as we heard from the panel here. And that will be a big change, and that will also introduce a lot of complexity. In buildings, there's another time factor, and we see circular economy happening in H&M, for example, the clothing retail. They have their own systems for bringing in textile. They don't wait for a Swedish system, but they are big, and we see it happening, for example, with Apple, that have their robot. But in the building sector, in order to get the business case for real estate owners, how do you design your circular building in that sense that it can last for 50, 70 years, and you will still have value of the material when it goes back? That is one of the main questions. Infrastructure is also slow, but this is a very good example of circularity in the infrastructure sector. One of the large contractors, NCC, they've made a digital platform for exchanging soil, gravel, and other material that you use for infrastructure projects. So this is basically an Uber or Spotify for building materials, where you can easily enter if you have an excess of 2,000 kilograms of gravel, and another contractor can easily log into this platform and buy it from you. And we've seen examples where this reduces transport by 90% in construction processes. So there you get the speed, you get the use of digitalization in order to fast forward sustainability. I would say there are 3 keys from our point of view. If we miss the design phase, and in Sweden we started circularity with the waste phase. you should start with the design phase. And also project management is where you can do those quick solutions and reduce a lot of carbon impact. Industrial symbiosis is the key. And as I said, what we need is more platforms. We see that you cannot do it by yourself. You need to find what kind of resource you can take from other partners. And here the public sector should step up and provide those solutions as well. Digitalization, we need information because the complexity that we bring into value cycles instead of value chains will need you to be able to track emissions throughout the cycles, and that will be very complicated. But we are looking at new technologies like, for example, blockchain that is used in bitcoins, because there you can actually trace carbon emissions throughout the lifespan of a raw material. So there will be a lot of innovation coming up, and as I said, emphasize design and speed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Andreas. So, Manuela, would you want to come? So we're moving now to the cement, to the products that are on those buildings. Can you enlighten us, Manuela?
Yes.
If you have the slide. Yes, there you have.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I would like to connect a little bit more with the previous presentation. As said, my company, we are members of the Green Building Councils worldwide, because the idea is that we believe in collective actions. We need to engage the supply chain. And last week, I was at the Green Build US event to present an initiative of cement sustainability initiative. So we presented our tool as CSI to develop EPDs. So as an industry, we developed an EPD tool that is a free source and is available for all companies that want to rely on a robust tool for calculating EPDs for cement and concrete. Okay, why talking?
One second. Can you explain to the audience what is an EPD?
Sorry. EPD means Environmental Product Declaration. Is a way to communicate through numbers, through indicators. It's a set of 24 indicators through which you communicate which is the environmental footprint of your product. There are specific rules on how to make this kind of assessment, and there are ISO reference standards upon which you do this kind of calculation. As an industry, we agreed to share a common tool on which we can calculate this environment. We can calculate all with given formulas, all these categories of impact based on common tools and also on common data. So we have some primary data by individual companies for specific products, and we share the secondary data throughout the cement world industry. For us, it's a tool to show transparency and willingness to communicate to our customers. And as said, having an EPD is rewarded within all, I would say, all the rating schemes for green buildings worldwide. So, going back, cement industry. As you know, cement and concrete, they are needed by society, especially by developing economies, not just for building, most of all even for infrastructure. And we as an industry, we are struggling and doing research to provide more innovative solutions to the market. So we are moving from the past, and people, maybe you have in mind the gray cities of the past. We are moving to green cities. And you can see on the top of my arrow, the city that is there is this green township in Bargon, is a LEED certified city in India that was built with completely different criteria than the traditional ones. So we can provide solutions. That is a strong message from our side. That's because the demand of concrete will necessarily keep growing. If you look versus 1950, the overall the cement demand in the world has increased 34 times. So it's increasing even faster than population itself. And cement is the second demanded material worldwide. So as an industry, we are committed to try to improve our footprint. What are we doing as a company in particular? First of all, we are engaging in sustainability commitments towards 2030 that are our company commitment based on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we selected the Sustainable Development Goals that are more applicable to our type of business, and we translated into commitments with clear targets to 2030. Two of these main commitments are reduction of the carbon footprint and circular economy. In terms of reduction of carbon footprint, we have a clear target to reduce our Scope 1 emissions of 30% by 2030. How does this affect our products? So the levers to reduce the CO2 from our products are more about the content of raw materials that we are using in our products. And there we can rely more and more on byproducts of other industry like the fly ashes or the slag to reduce the carbon content in our basic materials. And we can also try to do research in alternative type of binders that also can provide even better performance than traditional products, but at a lower level of CO2. Of course, our capability to use these different materials depends on geographical location, so depends on the availability country by country. In these photographs there, I showed you two examples. One is of Morocco. It's a dam where we use a special cement with fly ashes, and the second one is another project for a power plant in Poland, where we use the slag from the steel industry. So these are two options that are available depending on the capability of other industries to provide us secondary materials. Also, we are working on carbon capture and usage, because we know that the traditional levers will not be able to bring the needed reduction of CO2 for our industry. So we are doing research, also as a company, on options to capture CO2. And we have some real projects now ongoing, in Europe mainly, and also in terms of carbon capture and usage, we are trying to find the best solution for the best location. One example is a microalgae project that we are now developing on a semi-industrial scale in Morocco, where we use the CO2 from the stack of our kiln to grow up algae that, when dried, can be used as fish meal. This is in Morocco because there are the right climatic conditions to develop this kind of product. And finally, we are also working on doing research on recarbonation of concrete, because concrete at the end of life, when the building is demolished, can also capture back the CO2, depending on the condition on how it is demolished. So we are trying to understand better how to enhance this kind of process. If we look at circular economy, as said before, we have options to use waste material both in the process, for example, as fuels to replace the conventional traditional fossil fuels, but also as alternative raw materials. Indeed, our research and innovation department, they have the mandate always to try to find alternatives to materials where they can use recycled materials instead of traditional ones. And indeed, since the very beginning, so since the innovation phase, our researchers tried to use an LCA approach, so life cycle assessment approach. And also considering the options at the end of use of our product, so after, when you demolish the building, how you can recover the concrete and keep it separate. So that is an option to have construction and demolition waste reused for new types of concrete and cement. And usually we think that something containing recycled material could not be nice, but indeed we wanted also to show that you can have high design and architectural project with high recycled content. This is an example. This building is a building that is still existing. It was built for the Expo in Milan in 2015. You see that the facade of this building is done with mortar panels that are brilliant white. Indeed, they contain 80% of recycled material. It's a recycled Carrara marble, so from Carrara quarries. And this product it's a very special product in terms of performance, was really designed as to be contain high recycled content and be recycled at the end of life. So it was conceived specifically with this purpose. We further another additional environmental value. In this product, we have a photocatalytic additive. So this product is also reducing the air pollution, in particular abating the NOx in the atmosphere. So architecture can even match with recycled content. Just to conclude, energy transition. We know that to enable energy transition, you need to be able to store energy and also to effectively transport the energy. So even in this field, we try to give our contribution as a construction material industry. I just mentioned here 2 projects. One is called the NEST. This is about storage of energy in a very special type of concrete. So we have concrete modules where inside they have some kind of pipes with two circuits of pipes, one with oil and the other with hot water. And these modules can store the heat during the day and release the heat during the night. So it's a real kind of storage. And this in particular is applicable to solar energy. We have one real case now in Saudi Arabia applied already, and we are now running another pilot test in Europe as waste heat recovery from the steel industry. So this is the storage of energy, and in terms of transmission of energy, we have also developed a high thermal conductivity concrete that can be used to envelope the cables for the transport of electricity and try to enhance the transmission process of the cable themselves, giving high benefits in the transmission of electricity. This is a product that is already available in the market. So this is
Thanks a lot.
What we are doing.
Really good. I have a question for you.
Yes.
So it was a very nice building that you built for the Milano exposition, but I suppose you don't build that many of those sort of buildings because there is not demand, right?
Absolutely.
And because is someone willing to pay more? Well, maybe for the expo, right? So, and so in order to create that demand, I suppose the regulatory framework has a key role to play, no? In enforcing, for example, the recycling of materials after the buildings, etc. And so could you enlighten us and tell us, which are the countries maybe that are leading, that have the regulatory frameworks that are more progressive towards this sort of requirements?
Luckily, Europe is one of the most sensitive countries, and we are also very active as an industry. So the European standards are helping a lot. There are some improvements that can still be done, but we are on the right way. The problem is mainly with emerging markets. In those emerging markets, sometimes governments, they are scared about the quality of new products, so they have a conservative approach. So they promote like ordinary Portland cement, so the very basic and standard material, and they doubt about having the workers, for example, that many times are not skilled, or local designers to use new and innovative materials for which maybe you need also to make more accurate design in the process. Like now, as an industry, we are working on a cement technology roadmap for Egypt. And one of the concerns we have in Egypt, we are not allowed to use blended cements. So for foundations and structural use, it's not allowed by the standard, while it's allowed in Europe or in other parts of the world.
Thanks a lot, Manuela.
Okay.
So some leapfrog is needed, and let's leapfrog to Hans. Thank you, Manuela. Thanks a lot, Hans, for being so patient. But because you're the last one, you have also the possibility of giving some also concluding remarks. Thank you, Hans.
Thanks a lot, and I think certainly I'm not the only one patient. I haven't brought you any slides. Why not? There are 2 reasons, maybe 3 if you count in I'm an engineer, not a PowerPoint designer. First of all, the role of materials in the whole story very often is not visible. Nevertheless, it requires definitely our full attention. Secondly, it normally goes, if we see it, far beyond the page. So it's very difficult, and we should try to avoid some cases just to try to fit it into pictures, but really see what's behind the pretty pictures we used to show. And I would like to take actually the opportunity of the next few minutes to give you, as a highlight, just say half a dozen of examples, not so much to tell you all about it, but just to get you thinking. I mean, try to structure this very complex field. Certainly what we see is there are two major impacts we see of materials on this whole climate debate. The one certainly is producing materials and everything that happens in the production. And as I said, we certainly are very involved in that, both as a materials producer as well as one that provides the plants for others to produce materials. Secondly, certainly the role of materials actually in products to ensure that the environmental, especially the climate performance, is good enough. And I would like to give you a few examples, and I will hopefully show you at the end. It's not actually easy to have a clear-cut division because we are trying to actually blur that division if possible. Let me start with the invisibility. Every second windmill out there in this world generating renewable electricity is turning on ThyssenKrupp slewing bearings. You will never see them. This is actually a good example for circular economy not being that good of an idea, or basically the idea would be to make the circle as long as possible. If you are building an offshore windmill, you don't want it to come back and be recycled. You want it to be there as long as possible because it's damn difficult to get them out there in the first place and even more difficult to get them back and recycle them properly. So you have to be very, very careful how you use the right materials to ensure in these harsh conditions a very, very good long-term performance, because the other thing is you want to have them good. Another product all of you know, and most likely nobody thinks about, is a beverage can. A beverage can, or also certainly a tin for food, is something that is actually, from a metallurgical point of view, an extremely challenging product. We have managed to reduce the wall thickness and therefore the weight of the can substantially. Those who are as old as I am will remember when at school we had a can of Coke and we emptied it, it was still a very solid metal cylinder you had. Today, if you have emptied it, even if you have only half emptied it, sometimes you have to be careful not to press it too much, because otherwise you completely crash it while it still sinks in and it all spills out. This is because the material properties have improved so much on that throwaway material that the wall thicknesses are so thin that it's a major challenge actually to get the steels right, because a single impurity in there will mean you have just a hole and the Coke comes out where you don't want it to come out. And here certainly, okay, it's a waste material, it's something you want to throw away, you're not drinking the steel, you're drinking the Coke. However, due to the fact you make it from steel, you actually have intrinsically a circular economy, because what do? You have this heap of waste, you just take a magnet and all the steel is out, you just get it back into the circle. A very important thing, this magnetic property, and it's very important to look at the properties of material and exploit them. Steel, the question of materials being around, I don't want to really go into that discussion. I just want to give you one example why I believe it's very important. We will need all materials and we will not have the best material. In a very specific application we can make that decision, but not across the board. Why will steel never disappear? It will never disappear because it has that ferromagnetic properties, which actually not only mean it's magnetic, you can get it out of waste, it also means it allows you to turn motion through a magnetic field into electricity or vice versa. Take your bicycle, that's the old dynamo you have, or take any electrical motor, that's exactly what's being there. And here certainly, as we all know, it's very important to speak about efficiency. And the quality of the material defines very much the efficiency. But the question is, how do we bring that to the awareness of people? If we are talking about a very big industrial motor, the engineers will know and will want to know what are the characteristics, what's the energy consumption, what's the losses, whatever else. So therefore, electrical steels which we produce with a very high transformation rate will work. However, and sorry I'm a little bit too early in spite of the time for that, think yourself a few weeks ahead. This last minute Christmas frenzy, you just got your Christmas tree and then you realize, oh, where are actually the Christmas tree lights? Don't worry, you just go to the next store and buy some because you will find them there all the time. The interesting thing is that product not only gives you nice candle lights on the Christmas tree, it equally heats your living room. Because mostly the transformer actually gets that hot that you don't have to turn on the heating. Reason being, on transforming electricity from the 220 volts you get out of the socket into the 6 volts the light bulbs need, you actually generate a lot of heat. It would not be possible. And that's now the difference. I mean, you don't care about it. You use it once a year, twice a year, possibly. However, if you look at how many hundreds of millions of people are doing that around the world, it actually adds up to quite a lot, much more than the electric motor, where actually the engineers have been carefully looking at what are the losses we can generate and what's the price we're willing to pay. And that certainly is very important to see what are things. But also, and let me get that right, sometimes we run into limitations. I mean, we heard a lot about buildings and circular economy in buildings. Some of you might remember the old elevator system of a Paternoster, which we had 100 years ago. A very nice circular system, actually being helped by the fact that, take people like me, would be helping on going down those who want to come up. It's just used the weight very much. However, if you take the tallest buildings in the world today, you are not having an elevator able to bring you from ground floor to the top floor. Why? Reason being, the cables will be just too heavy that you can't pull it all the way up and down. It just doesn't work. And that's one important thing we have to look at if you speak about this whole things about climate changes frameworks, which I mentioned earlier. We have two very important sets of laws. We have those laws, which we can take to Parliament and change in 3-4 readings of the House, and we have those which are natural physical laws we just cannot change. One of them are certain material characteristics which we can't change beyond a certain point. But we can find innovative solutions. What did we do at ThyssenKrupp? We invented an elevator called Multi, which basically says I don't need a rope. I'm actually using a magnetic field. The advantage not only is that you can go all the way, the other advantage is you can rebuild a Paternoster system. You just have two shafts next to each other, you connect them at top and bottom with a small horizontal part, and you can just go in circles, because with a magnetic field, in contrast to a rope or on which the elevator is hanging, you can actually go any direction you like. So limitations sometimes are good because we try to find ways around, and ways around always, or not always, but sometimes are much more interesting than the original one. Certainly on that one, buildings, lead, it's very important that you do it energy efficiently. But also it's important that you look at systems not colliding. You mentioned earlier that in California there's a request more than 15% fly ash. My understanding is California wants to go away from coal-fired power stations. If you have a solar plant or a windmill, there is no fly ash anymore. So we have to think about new processes. That's one of the reasons why in our cement division we now look at alternative materials, clay-based, in order to add actually to the clinker, in order to replace the fly ash, because we will not have, as far as at least we believe that, in some decades, fly ash in the amounts we want. It's very important that if we look at optimizing systems, we understand where we do collide with other systems and where we shouldn't be taking things for granted that might actually not work. I mean, cement is very important for us. As I said, we're not making cement. We have experts on the colleagues who are on the panel who are much better at doing it. We just try to provide them with the appropriate equipment to do that. And certainly cement is a very good example for what I say, yes, I'm happy to see a future without coal perhaps in power generation. I don't see us going into a future of decarbonization. I mean, since I don't have slides, I could have done the talk sitting down. If I sat down, you wouldn't see that. Actually, if I personally decarbonized, my doctor would be happy. I would be 10% lighter, that's the amount of carbon in the human body, and I would be about in the weight range where he would sign off, fine, that's good. However, I wouldn't be able to be here and present. That might not be a bad thing, I don't know, but definitely I would not function. And we have many parts in our process industries where we need carbon, not for energy purposes, but for chemical purposes. I spoke about steels. The difference between iron and steel actually is the carbon that defines the properties, not just the carbon, but also the carbon. So therefore, we can't do that. The only thing we can achieve, and that's what we're looking for, what can we do, what can we do, what can we offer to our customers at ThyssenKrupp, is net greenhouse gas neutrality. And therefore, for example, in cement, yes, we look at things like municipal waste into cement plants. That's what I hinted at earlier. In India, it doesn't work because the municipal waste is cheaper to just dump and let it rot. However, we certainly realize if we want to do that, it's not just circular economy, it's really breaking down boundaries. We have, and that would be the last example I would like to mention, a very big project called Carbon to Chem. It's not just us, it's us and a lot of other very, very big names, where we are trying to link the steel industry with the cement industry. In the steel industry, we have carbon-containing waste gases. The cement industry is in desperate need of a sustainable carbon source, because most plastics are basically carbon plus a lot of other elements attached to them. So why don't you just marry the two? And that's exactly what we're doing. The problem is it requires a lot of energy. You need renewable energy for that. So you have to develop things like water electrolysis plants and whatever. And, very important, you have to bring it all together. So therefore, actually, we are not first developing the product. We are already developing the business model at the same time, because only if we have that, it will actually work in such a complex world. So with these 6 examples I gave you, I hope, as I said, I have at least been able to set your mind thinking about what's important, and also warned you that sometimes it seems to be so nice to find a solution such as fly ash, but it might not last that long. I think most of the buildings we build with fly ash today will see the days when there's no fly ash available anymore. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. So I'm standing here before lunch, you and lunch, but because I don't want to be that person, I offer you the possibility to be the one that stands before us and lunch. Any questions from the audience to the panelists? No? Okay. Yes, there is one. No.
Thank you very much. I came in here late, but I've really learned a lot from the presentation. I'm Sunday Leonard. I work with the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel to the Global Environment Facility in Washington. And I just want to make a comment, because we're actually interested in promoting circular economy as part of the way the GEF or the projects that are being sponsored by the GEF. And I think the point you made about the windmill, and the fact that in harsh conditions, it might be preferable not to promote circular economy. But what you said about building the windmills to have a longer life is actually part of the principles of the circular economy. So I think if we try to build to live long, to stay longer, to service us longer, then we're actually still promoting the circular economy. And I think overall, what we really need to do is, as you have rightly said, to have a system thinking in whatever we are doing, to see how everything links together, and to make sure that we come up with a win-win solution at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that comment. Let me take that as a clarification. What I wanted to do is actually to contrast this very long-lasting bearings with the throwaway can after a few weeks thereafter. Certainly, you're fully right. Both of them require a circular approach. One circle might be much longer than the other one. But it's also very important that we look at that then to understand. I said something about transparency very early when you unfortunately couldn't be here yet, because I was on a point in the late 90s, early 2000s, where suddenly in the steel industry we saw our recycling rates drop from 40% to nearly under 30%. What had happened? What had happened was that we had a problem with the metrics. How do we measure recycling rates? We basically look what's the annual production and how much scrap goes into it. However, with an exploding demand for steel around the world, and the same I'm pretty sure you will find with a lot of other materials, and the problem that the average lifetime of steel is not necessarily the hundreds of years of constructions or 100 years of constructions offshore, neither the 12 weeks of a can, but some 40 years in between, it meant that you only had available scrap what was produced 40 years ago. So if you look at the scrap being used compared to production 40 years ago, you were at 90+%. That's one thing I would like to say. It's very, very often we can mislead ourselves by looking at certain things, because you're right, we need to have good measures for that, and we need to understand what we mean. And it's not always the same thing. It's not always that a short lifetime or long lifetime is the issue, or high rate or low rate. It is really about properly understanding the system, I would say.
With that note, let me conclude with 3 words that I will take home. The first one is industrial symbiosis. The second one is metrics, so that we can understand the full life cycle transparently and, if possible, agreed across the industry. And the third one is regulation. So I wish you a very nice lunch, and we hope to see you in the next sessions. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Great speeches.